Once again, West Coast News Editor for Entertainment Weekly, Lynette Rice. Next, the creator and executive producer of Desperate Housewives and Devious Maids, Marc Cherry. The executive producer of Breaking Bad and Rectify, Mark Johnson. And the creator, executive producer, and showrunner of The Americans, Joe Weisberg.
I am privileged to moderate the first ever showrunner panel at this cable convention. Let's hope there will be more. Now, before I get into the big picture questions, I got to go right to the juicy stuff with you, Mark. You just left a show with 4 very complicated women. Why are you jumping into a new show with 4 new women?
What a good question. I love writing women, so it's not really more complicated than that. I find, writing women women on television really work. I got my start being Dixie Carter's personal assistant when she was on Designing Women. Then my first big gig was The Golden Girls. First show I created with my ex-writing partner was called The 5 Mrs. Buchanans. Then I've done Desperate. Now I'm doing this one. I love getting gals together and having them talk. It's something I understand, and I find them to be endlessly entertaining. So I don't mind the complications, as you say.
I should probably give you a second to explain what your show is about.
Yeah, my new show is called Devious Maids. It's about some women working in Beverly Hills for some really crazy rich people, and it's about their lives and the very intimate relationship between people who work in the home and employers, and how that workplace is different than any other kind of workplace because of what the people who work there are exposed to. Certainly, when I was working for Hal Holbrook and Dixie in their home in Bel Air, you just get exposed to different things. You become part of the family in a weird way, and their trials and tribulations become yours. And the format was brought to me from Mexico, and when I saw it, I thought, I have a unique perspective on this because I was the help at one time, and now many years later, I have folks working for me, and so I had a lot to say about that world, and I thought it would be fun, and the show's turned out really well, and it premieres a week from this Sunday, and I'm looking forward to folks getting to take a look at it.
All right, now this is a question for both Marks, and I'm sorry, we'll jump you in later. You started your career in television, creating content for broadcast. What were your early perceptions about the content that was on cable and creating for cable?
Well, I come from a feature world. I've been producing movies since, since the 80s. Barry Levinson and I did 11 movies together, starting with Diner. So that was the perspective I came from. When first TV I did was actually at CBS, was a show called LA Doctors, and then we did a show called The Guardian. I didn't really know about cable, and most of the feature people I was working with had no idea what the possibilities were in cable. And today, of course, everybody I'm working with, writers, directors, actors, there isn't a person in the feature world who doesn't desperately want to get involved in TV, primarily cable.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I got started 24 years ago when there were only 4 networks. Fox had come into being, that was what I did for the last 23 years, and then this past July I started doing Devious for Lifetime, and that's my first experience with cable. And what cable means now is something completely different than what it meant a couple of decades ago, and I think for even the most casual viewer of television, you can see that the most exciting work is being done on cable. That's kind of where the buzz-worthy shows come from. Every once in a while, the networks put on something that gets some attention, but for whatever reason, the cable networks, and I think it's simply because they're so hungry to get viewers, they're taking more risks. And of course, as we all know, the safest thing you can do is to take risks, and that's what's going on there. So it's a really fun world to be a part of, and I'm certainly glad that I've joined the parade.
Good quote. Safest thing you can do is take risks. That's good. Joe, what was your perception of the form? You started with Damages, correct? And in cable?
Yeah, I've only been working in television for about 5 or 6 years. I can't say honestly I got involved in cable because it was more interesting or the better work was being done. There was really more a lifestyle question. I remember talking to my agent about what would be a better place to work, broadcast or cable, and he just started talking about what it was like to try and do 23 episodes of something on a broadcast network. I was talking to Mark about this backstage a little bit, and sort of the grind and what it would be like, and I just didn't think I could survive it. Really not having any kind of a break, working these long hours year-round, as Mark was saying, doing it for 8 years. I didn't think I had that in me. And then he started describing cable. And you could do, 13 episodes and have a couple months off. And it started sounding like being back in school and having a vacation. And right now I'm on hiatus from my show, and that's why I'm smiling and in a good mood. If you had seen me, really, if you'd seen me 2 months ago, I was a different person. I was scowling all the time. I was exhausted. I had a headache. So that was really it for me.
Well, and I had said to Mark, I asked, how many episodes had you done of Breaking Bad? And it's about close to 60, right?
Right, that's
and
right.
your guys are shutting down. Well, we did 180 of Desperate Housewives. And I was much thinner and had much more hair when we started. And it's incredible the amount of time and effort, because you really, you get 2 weeks off in May, and that's it. And then you start plotting the next season. And to me, the thing, if you're doing a soap opera, I think it may be different if you're doing a procedural, but the intense plotting that goes into doing a soap opera, it's just, the workload is overwhelming. And usually, for people who've really watched my show, you can kind of feel it like around episode 14, where stuff starts to not make sense. Yeah, I've run out of story at that point. And then usually I try to get it all together, like episode 21, right before the finale. I'm like, okay, I know how to end the thing. So really, that's one of the reasons why I'm so impressed with what people can do on cable, because literally, you look at some of the shows, and when I say soap, I just mean, continuing drama, storylines that, change over every single episode. You get to do actually deeper, more sophisticated, complicated work on cable because you have more time. And some people can really pull it off on networks, but a show like Desperate, not every season was created equal, and sometimes you go, I think this will be compelling, and then 5 episodes into it, you're like, oh, okay, that was wrong. And then you're, okay, well, maybe next season it'll be better. It's cable. You have, when we started Devious this year, I had every episode plotted out before we started production. I never had that with Desperate. So that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the cable universe, because they really allow the creators to have a vision from beginning to end. And I think that the potential for the work being better, not that it always is, but the potential is there.
Let's talk about the difference between the two, because the perception about cable is that there's so much freedom, standards and practices be damned, you can say and do whatever you want. How real is that perception?
I mean, we get every episode is submitted to the people at the network who tell us what is okay and what isn't. I mean, you literally can say shit and not fuck. I don't know what sense that makes, but there are very specific rules, and they're just a little bit different.
You can't really say fuck here either. So. Just so you know.
Wait, but this because it's cable. It's cable, right? I get it.
Mark, have you found that?
They're just different standards. Certainly with Breaking Bad and with Rectify, there are some rules that we have to adhere by, and we are constantly in battle over the rules are a little bit, they're more lax, but at the same time, there's certain things that we can't do, that our stories, there are different versions of all of our episodes, I think, that are slightly better, that won't be the ones that are aired.
Is there, I know with broadcast, there's always a certain amount of bartering too, like, well, if I take out this butt shot, can I put the shower scene in? Is that what's happening as well in cable? Have you found yourself bartering, Mark?
I'm lucky that I'm so probably still in the network mode of broadcast standards that my experience with this show is they haven't given me a correction yet. I'm pretty pretty well aware of what I'm allowed to do. And also, you get pretty good after a lifetime on the networks of, you can do provocative ideas, but you just, like we have a scene where a woman is undressing, and so you kind of see maybe a touch more cleavage than you would on the network, but we didn't go so far that it would be a problem for cable. So, you're always finding that line, but I tend to be a little conservative in some of how I approach it. So, I think that literally Desperate was turned down. One of the reasons we handed the pilot to HBO, and I heard back from one of the executives there that, well, one of the reasons they turned it down is it wasn't gritty enough. There was no nudity. There was, the language was pretty tame, which meant, it was a racy show for ABC, but not so much for cable. So it's interesting. It kind of depends upon who you are as the creator and what you're doing. I would imagine something like Breaking Bad, which is dealing with drugs, is an issue. I mean, the very ideas involved with that, I think, is potentially more dangerous than some of the stuff that I do, which is more, personality, character-based things. Did they stop you from a lot of drug ideas?
No, thematically, we've been given total liberty. It really comes down to language, nudity, and to a certain degree, violence, although we certainly have done things on Breaking Bad that you would get nowhere close to being able to do on network.
The only violence on Desperate Housewives was really behind the scenes, so.
I don't know if you find this, but I think there's also, with all this liberty, there's a certain risk, which is you get yourselves in dramatic trouble, which is because you can do almost whatever you want, you start thinking, oh, well, the audience will love it if we have this much sex or this much violence, and you start to cross that line into gratuity, which is what you don't want to do.
Right.
So you have to watch yourself in a way that because nobody else is watching you, really.
Well, let's talk about budgets, too. I think there's also the perception that maybe in cable you don't have quite as much money to play with as you would in broadcast. So, like, if you wanted to stage a tornado or crash a plane, could you do it?
It's funny. I watch television completely differently from how I watched it before I was making television. Now I don't really enjoy it anymore. I just watch and think, how much did that cost? How much did that cost? How did they do that? Game of Thrones. I'm like, wow, who is paying for that? It just outrages me. And I saw the end of Downton Abbey, and I knew the guy was going to die at the end, and there's his car, and I know the car is going to crash, and the screen goes black, and there's the overturned car with an arm sticking out. And I thought, oh, well, that's because it's too expensive to pay for the car crash. I didn't know any of that before. So, really, you can do anything. You just have to find ways to do it that are less expensive in certain ways. So I don't feel that we ever have to not do things, but we have to find ways to do them that don't cost as much.
Yeah, they give you a set amount of money. So if you're going to do that costs this, you have to find the cost for it. And sometimes you make the decision, okay, I'm going to put my money into this episode, which will have a tornado, or pick your natural disaster. And then, just like, well, then these stories are going to take place in the same room for a few episodes. And, you wonder, why are they always in the bedroom? That's why. Because there's an earthquake in 2 episodes. So, and and that's part of the job of the showrunner / creator or writer of the show, is just finding creative ways to spend the money, the best ways to do it. And it's easier to do, again, going back to, if you have time. If you have time, you can do some really smart plotting and planning to where you do these things. So it's all possible, but like I say, I think it's a little bit easier on cable.
And you do have the time if you're only doing 13 episodes a season, something like that. It's so much harder when you're doing network television, because once the train starts, it doesn't stop, and you can't take that time and say, okay, how do we overcome this problem? And Mark's absolutely right. You have the time, and we have money battles, of course we do, but at the end of the day, we have the right amount of money to make our show, and we've accepted that, and that's what we write to. And when we come up with an obstacle, something that we haven't been able to do, either do as Mark says and do a bottle episode at some point, or we just find hopefully some imaginative way to overcome it.
As a viewer, it's such a giddy time, because now there's so much creative, gritty, edgy content on cable. Do you have any fear now that there's going to be so much, the market is so oversaturated, that viewers are just going to look for the mindless fare, like another diving competition show somewhere? I mean, is there's like too much of a good thing?
I don't think we have to worry about people leaving us for the I mean, at the end of the day, because I was very lucky with Desperate. It was considered kind of racy, but the interesting thing is it was always about something, which was, the frustrations of the modern woman who has chosen to be a wife or a mother. The idea was always the strong part of it. Whether you saw, Marcia Cross wearing a teddy in an episode, that could be slightly provocative, but it was the idea that people came for, that's what gave the characters their resonance. So the truth is, there will always be shows that maybe try to spice it up with language, violence, nudity. At the end of the day, it's what is the show creator, what do the writers have to say that is the major selling point. And as long as someone is doing a show, hopefully with provocative ideas, I think that there will always be room for people to say provocative ideas, things that they've observed about society. I don't think we run the risk of running out of those things to say. But, nudity and swearing and violence are great, but now they're so ubiquitous. I still think the idea is king. And I think that's what will really determine who comes to your show, is that enough people relating to what you want to talk about.
I got to ask you about the Walking Dead effect. If there's one thing that show has demonstrated, is that a cable show can get pretty huge ratings. Is that putting some undue pressure on you with your shows?
No, not at all. Yeah, I think it is, and even in relation to your last question about how to get an audience when there are so many good shows out there and so many popular shows, I do worry about that a lot. I watch when The Americans is on, I watch the Twitter feed, and you see people who are either about to watch it or not about to watch it, and they say, tonight I'm watching this and this and this and this. And how many people can watch television all night long, every night? Although there seem to be a fair number of people who can do that, there are just too many good shows. And I don't know how you get enough of an audience and high enough ratings for enough good shows and new shows. I worry about it a lot. I don't know.
Mark?
Numbers always are at the back of your mind. The truth of the matter is that the beauty of cable is you don't need those huge numbers to be a success. And as I say, I come from the feature world where opening weekend means everything. And the beauty of what we do now, you can do, as long as you have interesting characters and you put them in good compromising situations and you ladle it with a lot of irony, it's, the audience, you will have an audience. You'll have an audience that will justify your being.
Are you sure?
Positive. Trust me.
Marc Cherry, Mark Johnson, Joe Weisberg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was quick.